Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air in Port Charles General Hospital, a smell Jason Morgan had come to know too well. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a harsh glow on the tiled floor as he sat in the waiting room, his broad shoulders hunched and his hands clasped tightly together. His leather jacket, a constant companion through years of chaos, felt heavy on his frame, as if it carried the weight of every loss he'd endured. Monica Quartermaine, his mother, was gone. The news had come like a bullet, sharp and final, tearing through the fragile threads of hope he'd been clinging to since her diagnosis. Monica had been a pillar in his life, even when their relationship was strained. She was the one who fought for him when he didn't know how to fight for himself, the one who saw past the stoic enforcer to the man beneath. Her cancer had been relentless, and though she'd faced it with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, it had won. Jason stared at the floor, the tiles blurring as his mind replayed her final moments, her hand in his, her voice weak but steady, telling him to live, to find something worth holding onto. He hadn't cried then, and he wasn't crying now. But the hollow ache in his chest was worse than tears. Port Charles was a town built on secrets and drama, and Monica's death sent ripples through its tightly knit community. The Quartermaines were a dynasty, and Monica was their heart. Her loss left a void that no one could fill, least of all Jason, who had spent years distancing himself from the family's legacy. He wasn't a Quartermaine in the way Edward or Alan had been, he was Jason Morgan, the man who lived in the shadows, who solved problems with fists or a gun. But Monica had always seen more in him, and now that she was gone, he felt unmoored, like a ship cut loose in a storm. The days that followed were a blur of condolences and casseroles, of people offering words that meant nothing to him. Carly stopped by his apartment, her eyes red from crying, her usual fire dimmed. "She loved you, Jason," she said, her voice breaking. "You know that, right?" He nodded, but the words didn't reach him. Sam came too, her presence quiet but steady, her hand resting on his arm as if she could anchor him. But nothing could. Monica's death wasn't just a loss, it was a reckoning. It forced him to confront the life he'd built, the choices he'd made, the blood on his hands. Jason had always lived by a code: loyalty, protection, survival. He worked for Sonny Corinthos, handling the darker side of Port Charles's underworld, and he was good at it. Too good. But Monica's death made him question everything. She'd always wanted more for him, a life beyond the violence and danger. "You're not just a weapon, Jason," she'd said once, her eyes fierce with conviction. "You're my son." Those words echoed in his mind now, a challenge he couldn't ignore. He started noticing things he hadn't before, the way his presence made people nervous, the way mothers pulled their children closer when he walked by. He saw the fear in Sam's eyes when he came home with bruises or blood on his knuckles, even if she never said it. He saw the way Carly relied on him to clean up her messes, the way Sonny leaned on him to keep the empire standing. He was their rock, their fixer, but at what cost? Monica's death stripped away the armor he'd worn for years, leaving him raw and exposed. It was a rainy Tuesday when the idea first took root. He was sitting in his apartment, the silence deafening, when he thought about leaving. Not just leaving Sonny's organization, but leaving Port Charles entirely. The thought was absurd, reckless, insane, a crazy decision that went against everything he'd ever known. Jason Morgan didn't run. He faced problems head-on, with a gun or his fists. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He wasn't running from danger, he was running toward something else, something Monica had always believed he could find. He didn't tell anyone at first. Not Sonny, not Carly, not Sam. He needed to be sure, needed to know this wasn't just grief talking. He spent nights poring over maps, researching places far from Port Charles, places where no one knew his name. He thought about Montana, with its wide open skies and endless stretches of land, or maybe Alaska, where the cold might numb the pain. He imagined a life where he wasn't defined by his past, where he could be someone new, someone Monica would be proud of. The decision crystallized one night when he found an old photo in a box of Monica's things. It was him, barely 20, before the accident that changed everything, standing next to her at a Quartermaine picnic. He was smiling, his arms slung around her shoulders, and she was laughing, her eyes bright with love. That Jason, the one who laughed, who loved without fear, was a stranger now. But maybe he could find him again. He started making plans in secret. He liquidated some of his offshore accounts, moving money to a new identity he'd created with the help of an old contact from his mercenary days. He bought a small cabin in Montana, sight unseen, because it felt right, remote, quiet, a place to start over. He didn't tell Sonny, knowing his boss would try to talk him out of it, or worse, see it as a betrayal. He didn't tell Carly, because she'd cling to him, her loyalty fierce but suffocating. And he didn't tell Sam, because he wasn't sure he could look into her eyes and still go through with it. The night he decided to leave, he packed a single duffel bag, some clothes, a few photos, a gun he couldn't bring himself to leave behind. He stood in his apartment, looking at the life he was leaving, and felt a strange mix of fear and freedom. This was it, the crazy decision that would change everything. He was walking away from Port Charles, from the mob, from the man he'd become. He was choosing to live, not just survive. The drive out of town was quiet, the road stretching out before him like a promise. He didn't look back, didn't let himself think about what he was leaving behind. He thought about Monica, about the life she'd wanted for him, and for the first time in years, he felt something like hope. Montana was waiting, and with it, a chance to be someone new. But Port Charles had a way of pulling people back, and Jason's departure didn't go unnoticed. Carly found out first, piecing it together when he didn't answer her calls. She stormed into Sonny's office, her face a mask of fury and fear. "He's gone, Sonny. Jason's gone." Sonny, usually unshakable, felt a chill. Jason was his right hand, his brother in all but blood. His absence left a hole in the organization, one that enemies would exploit. Sam, meanwhile, was quieter in her grief. She found a note he'd left her, tucked into a book she'd been reading. It was short, in his careful handwriting, "I need to do this. For me. For Monica. I'll always love you." She read it over and over, her heart breaking but understanding. She knew Jason better than anyone, knew the weight he carried, the guilt and pain he never spoke of. She wanted to hate him for leaving, but she couldn't. She loved him too much. In Montana, Jason settled into his new life with a quiet determination. The cabin was small but sturdy, surrounded by pines and a sky so big it made him feel small. He took odd jobs, fixing fences, hauling supplies, work that tired his body but left his mind free. He didn't talk much, but the locals didn't pry. They called him Jay, a name he'd chosen for its simplicity, and he liked the way it felt, like shedding a skin. But the past wasn't so easy to escape. Port Charles's shadow stretched long, and Sonny's enemies saw Jason's absence as an opportunity. A new player, a ruthless figure from Jason's past, started making moves, targeting Sonny's territory. Word reached Jason through a burner phone he kept for emergencies, a message from Spinelli, "Trouble brewing. Sonny needs you." Jason stood on the porch of his cabin, the phone in his hand, the Montana sky stretching out above him. He'd left to find peace, to honor Monica's memory, but Port Charles was a part of him, woven into his bones. The crazy decision to leave had been his first step toward freedom, but now he faced another: go back and face the chaos, or stay and let it consume the people he loved. He didn't decide that night. He sat under the stars, thinking of Monica, of Sam, of the man he wanted to be. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt like he had a choice. And that, more than anything, was what Monica had wanted for him. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor was a scent Jason Morgan had come to know intimately, a pervasive odor that clung to his clothes and his memory. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't the precursor to a tense negotiation, a threat delivered in hushed tones to a rival, or a vigil at the bedside of a wounded enforcer. This time, it was the final, suffocating blanket thrown over the remains of his world. Monica Quartermain was gone. The woman who had been his anchor in the turbulent sea of his dual existence, both as the privileged Jason Quartermain he once was and the hardened Jason Morgan he became, had been ripped from the shore. Her death wasn't a peaceful surrender to age or illness. It was violent, sudden, a brutal tear in the fabric of Port Charles's reality. For Jason, a man whose entire life was built on a foundation of control over his territory, his business, his emotions, the very chaos he navigated daily, this was an uncontrollable cataclysm. The news, delivered in a doctor's flat, apologetic tone, didn't register as words. It was a physical blow, a concussive force that emptied his lungs and hollowed out his chest. He stood there, a statue carved from grief and shock, his usually piercing blue eyes gone distant and flat, reflecting the flickering fluorescent lights overhead as if they were stars in a dead sky. The days that followed were a blur of grim formalities. The Quartermaine mansion, a place he had spent a lifetime both embracing and fleeing, was filled with the low murmur of condolences, the cloying scent of too many flowers, the rustle of black silk and wool. Alan, his father, moved through the rooms like a ghost, his own grief a palpable, silent scream. Tracy was uncharacteristically quiet, and Ned wore a mask of stoic dignity that barely concealed his devastation. They were a family in ruins, and Jason, the prodigal son who had never fully returned, stood at the epicenter of the wreckage, feeling more an outsider than ever. He accepted handshakes and hugs with a stiff, unyielding posture, his jaw perpetually clenched, his responses limited to terse, single-syllable acknowledgments. The world saw Jason Morgan, the unflappable enforcer, the stone-cold pillar of strength. They didn't see the fissures spreading deep within the granite. The public facade was impenetrable, but in private, the dam broke. Alone in the sparse, utilitarian apartment that served as his home, a space devoid of the sentimental clutter that defined a normal life, the control shattered. A roar of pure, unadulterated anguish tore from his throat, a sound so raw it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. His fist, hardened by years of combat, connected with the drywall, leaving a crater of shattered plaster and exposed lath. He swept the contents of his desk onto the floor, a cascade of papers, a laptop, a framed photograph of him and Monica from a lifetime ago. The glass in the frame splintered, webbing across her smiling face, a perfect metaphor for his shattered soul. This was more than grief. Grief was a known quantity. He had grieved for his brother, Drew, for friends lost to the violent life he led. This was a fundamental unmooring. Monica had been his tether to the man named Jason Quartermaine. She was the living memory of the boy who loved horses, who had a future in medicine, who believed in right and wrong. She never asked him to be that person again, but her mere existence was a quiet testament that he had once been capable of goodness, of a life not stained by blood and moral compromise. With her gone, that tether was severed. Jason Morgan was all that remained, and the darkness that had always lived within him, the darkness he kept carefully caged and channeled for his work, now threatened to consume him entirely. Sleep became a foreign country he could no longer visit. When he closed his eyes, he saw it, not the peaceful face of his mother in her final rest, but the violent act that had taken her. His mind, trained in tactics and violence, reconstructed the event with horrifying clarity. He saw the cowardice of the attack, the vulnerability of the victim, the utter senselessness of it. A life of such immense value, extinguished for what? A petty grudge? A message? A simple wrong place, wrong time? The injustice of it was a cancer, eating away at his reason. He spent long hours at the warehouse, the heart of his criminal empire, but he wasn't working. He was just staring into the middle distance, the schematics and ledgers that usually commanded his absolute attention now just meaningless scribbles. His second-in-command, the ever-loyal and perceptive Cody, would bring him coffee that would grow cold, deliver updates that were met with a vacant nod. The entire organization felt the shift. The temperature had dropped. The calm, calculated center of their world was now a volatile core of simmering rage. "It's like he's not even in there," Cody confided to a trusted associate, his voice low with concern. "It's just an emptiness. And I'm afraid of what's going to fill it." What filled it was a single, crystallizing thought. It didn't arrive as a flash of inspiration or a moment of madness. It was a slow, chilling dawn, a logical conclusion reached at the end of a long, dark road of grief and rage. The system had failed. The law, with its procedures and protections for the accused, its endless appeals and technicalities, was a game. It was a slow, grinding machine that might, eventually, deliver a form of justice, but it was a justice that would be argued over by lawyers in expensive suits, debated in stuffy courtrooms, and likely end with a sentence that could be bargained down or served in relative comfort. It was a process that would force his family to relive the horror day after day, to have Monica's memory picked apart by defense attorneys, her life reduced to evidence exhibits and witness testimony. He could not, and would not, subject her memory to that. He would not allow her killer to breathe the same air, to have a future, to possibly one day walk free, while Monica lay cold in the ground. The old Jason, the one guided by a strict, albeit twisted, code of honor, might have worked within the confines of his own power to ensure the perpetrator was found and handed over, trusting his methods would force the system's hand. But the old Jason was buried with Monica. The new Jason emerged from the ashes of his grief with a crazy decision, one that would send shockwaves through every corner of Port Charles and redefine his destiny forever. He wasn't going to find Monica's killer and deliver him to the police. He wasn't even going to mete out his own brand of mob justice and dispose of the body. That was too clean, too quick, too anonymous. The punishment had to be more profound. It had to be a living hell. He decided he would capture the killer. And then, he would keep him. The plan was as insane as it was simple. He would find the man responsible, abduct him, and imprison him in a location so secret, so remote, that he would simply vanish from the face of the earth. Not to be killed, but to be stored. To be forced to exist in a gray, concrete cell, to be fed enough to survive, to be denied sunlight, human contact, hope. He would become a living ghost, a permanent, breathing monument to his own crime. He would have an eternity to reflect on the life he had taken, trapped in a perpetual present of regret and isolation. It was a fate Jason deemed far more fitting than a lethal injection or a life sentence in a prison where he could still form alliances, read books, see the sky. This was eternal punishment. This was damnation on earth. The sheer, terrifying audacity of the plan was a measure of his broken state. This wasn't the strategic move of a crime lord, it was the visceral, all-consuming need of a grieving son. It crossed lines that even he had never contemplated crossing. It was a descent into a particular kind of madness, a cold, calculated, and utterly remorseless madness. The first step was intelligence. Jason, leveraging every resource at his disposal, his network of informants, his cyber experts, his sheer intimidation, began his hunt. He moved with a terrifying focus that eclipsed even his most determined efforts in mob wars. This was personal. This was sacred. The Port Charles Police Department, led by Commissioner Anna Devane and Detective Dante Falconeri, was conducting its own investigation, but they were bound by rules and regulations. Jason was not. He operated in the shadows they could not legally penetrate, applying pressure to the city's underbelly with a relentless force. Within a week, he had a name. Leo Karn. A small-time hustler with a history of assault and burglary, a man whose life was a series of bad decisions culminating in the worst one imaginable. The motive was as pointless as Jason had feared, a botched robbery. Monica had been in the wrong place, witnessing something she shouldn't have, and Karn, in a panic, had lashed out with fatal consequences. The sheer banality of the reason for her death made the rage inside Jason burn even colder, even brighter. The acquisition of the target was executed with military precision. Jason didn't send his men. This was a task he would undertake alone. He tracked Karn to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town, a place that rented rooms by the hour and asked no questions. The takedown was swift and silent. One moment, Leo Karn was counting his ill-gotten gains on a stained mattress, the next, a strong arm was locked around his neck, a cloth soaked in chloroform clamped over his mouth and nose. There was no struggle, no dramatic fight. It was over in seconds. When Karn awoke, the world had shrunk to a 10 by 10 foot concrete box. The air was cool and still, smelling of damp concrete and disinfectant. A single, bare bulb protected by a metal cage hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh, unforgiving light. There was a cot with a thin mattress, a stainless steel toilet and sink combo bolted to the wall, and a heavy, metal door with a small, sliding viewport at eye level. There were no windows. No clues to his location. The only sound was the low, constant hum of a ventilation system and the frantic, terrified beating of his own heart. Jason observed him through a hidden camera. He watched as Karn scrambled to his feet, pounding on the door, screaming until his voice was hoarse, then collapsing into sobs. He felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just a cold, grim sense of purpose. This was the new reality. This was justice. Back in Port Charles, the disappearance of Leo Carn was noted, but initially, it raised few eyebrows. He was a criminal. Criminals skipped town, met with foul play, or ended up in the river all the time. But Anna Devane was no ordinary commissioner, and Dante Falconeri had a deep, complicated history with Jason. They knew Carn was a person of interest in the Quartermain case. His sudden, ghost-like vanishing act was too convenient, too coincidental. It stank of vigilante justice. Dante was the first to voice the unspeakable suspicion. "It's Jason," he told Anna, his face a mask of grim certainty. "This has his fingerprints all over it. He didn't just take Carn out. That would be too easy. This feels different. It feels personal." Meanwhile, Jason began the meticulous process of maintaining his prisoner. He was the sole warden, the sole keeper of the keys. He would arrive at the hidden location, a disused underground storage facility he had acquired years ago for weapons cache, its existence known only to him at unpredictable hours. He would slide a tray of bland, nutrient-rich food through a slot in the door. He never spoke. He was a phantom, a disembodied presence. The psychological warfare was immediate and brutal. For Carn, the isolation was a torture worse than any physical beatdown. The lack of human contact, the absence of any sensory stimulation, the total uncertainty of his fate, began to erode his sanity within days. He talked to himself, he screamed, he begged the empty walls for mercy. Jason would watch the footage, his expression unchanging. He was studying his subject, ensuring the punishment was having its intended effect. Back at the Quartermain mansion, the family was struggling to pick up the pieces. Alan, drowning in his own grief, noticed a disturbing change in his son. Jason's visits became less frequent, and when he did come, he was more distant, more detached than ever before. It wasn't just grief, it was as if a part of him had been switched off. "Son," Alan said one evening, finding Jason staring out the window of the study, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. "We're all grieving. But you seem to be carrying this in a way that worries me. You're not talking. You're just hardening." Jason didn't turn. "I'm handling it, Dad." "This isn't handling it, Jason. This is letting it consume you. Monica wouldn't want this for you. She wouldn't want you to disappear into this darkness." At the mention of her name, Jason's jaw tightened. What she would want doesn't matter anymore. She's gone. What matters is what happened. The chasm between Jason and his family widened. His relationship with Carly, his oldest friend and confidant, grew strained. She could see the abyss in his eyes and was terrified of what she saw there. "Jason, talk to me," she pleaded, cornering him at the Metro Court. "This silence, it's scaring me. People are talking. Dante is asking questions. What have you done?" His gaze was impenetrable. "What needed to be done?" "That's not an answer." "Is Leo Carn with you?" "Jason, look at me. If you have him, you have to turn him over. This isn't you. This is the grief talking, it's the rage, but it's not Jason Morgan." "You're right," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's not the Jason Morgan you knew. That man died with my mother." The aftermath of Monica Quartermain's death sends devastating ripples through Port Charles, but the most surprising shift occurs in Jason Morgan. Known for his stone-cold demeanor and ability to compartmentalize even the most heartbreaking tragedies, Jason has always appeared nearly untouchable when it comes to grief. He has buried friends, lost loves, and endured violence that would shatter most people, yet he always maintained a sense of control. But losing Monica, the woman who grounded him when no one else could, shakes Jason in a way few people expected. It isn't just another loss for him. It's a collapse of something foundational, something that tethered him to his past and to the part of himself that still remembered what it was like to be Jason Quartermain before the accident. Her death feels like the final severing of ties to that man, and at the same time, it leaves him feeling like an orphan all over again. Jason spends the first few days after Monica's passing in silence. Those close to him notice that he is not reacting with the typical quiet strength they are used to. Instead, he is distant, hollow, and restless, moving through Port Charles as though he is on autopilot. Sam tries to reach him, reminding him that he still has people who care about him, but Jason avoids the comfort. Carly attempts to snap him out of it, telling him Monica wouldn't want him to shut down, but he barely listens. It isn't until he is alone at Monica's empty house, walking through the silent rooms that used to buzz with quartermain drama, that the reality fully hits him. For the first time in years, Jason breaks down, letting the tears come in a way he never allows anyone else to see. That moment of grief, raw and unguarded, marks the beginning of a transformation. Jason has always defined himself by control and discipline. Monica's death strips that away, leaving him vulnerable to emotions he has long suppressed. He starts questioning not only who he is without her but what purpose he serves anymore. He has been the enforcer, the protector, the man who carries out dangerous decisions for the people he loves. But what is he now that the last person who represented unconditional family love is gone? He begins to feel unmoored, almost reckless, as though the rules he once lived by no longer apply. Port Charles begins to notice subtle changes. Jason starts taking unnecessary risks during mob business. He goes into situations without the usual careful planning that defined him, shocking even Sonny. At first, Sonny assumes Jason is simply grieving and that it will pass, but the truth is far darker. Jason is not just mourning Monica. He is unraveling. The idea that he no longer has anything to lose starts creeping into his mind. Where once he fought to survive for his family, for Monica, for Sam, for Danny, now he seems ready to dare death to come for him. But grief is not the only fuel for Jason's transformation. Monica's death leaves unresolved feelings of guilt. In his heart, Jason knows he never fully gave her the son she deserved. She wanted Jason Quartermain back, the brilliant young man on his way to becoming a doctor, the son who laughed and celebrated holidays, the boy who dreamed of saving lives instead of taking them. Jason Morgan could never be that man again, and although Monica grew to love him for who he was, he always felt the weight of her disappointment. Losing her before he could truly bridge that gap eats at him, and guilt becomes a poison that clouds his judgment. Carly, sensing his spiral, tries desperately to intervene. She pushes him to lean on her, but Jason keeps her at arm's length, avoiding emotional conversations. He begins making decisions without consulting her, a sharp contrast to their usual united front. This alarms Carly, who knows better than anyone how dangerous Jason can become when he detaches himself from his emotions. Sonny, too, notices the difference and attempts to remind Jason that Monica would want him to live, not throw himself into chaos. But Jason no longer listens. In his mind, he believes that everything stable in his life has slipped away. Without Monica, he feels like he's walking through a world that doesn't make sense anymore. The turning point comes one night when Jason finds himself back at the Quartermain mansion. The place is empty, but memories haunt every corner. He recalls Monica's smile, her stubbornness, the way she refused to give up on him even when others did. In that haunting silence, Jason makes a decision, one that no one expects. Instead of retreating into his role as Sonny's right hand, Jason decides he needs to take matters into his own hands in a way he never has before. He believes that Monica's death has left a hole that nothing can fill, and the only way to make sense of the pain is to act on it. This decision is not just a reckless impulse. It's something darker, more unhinged. Jason begins to imagine a world where he breaks from Sonny completely, stepping into a role of power that he once refused to embrace. He has always avoided being the head of the mob, choosing instead to remain the loyal enforcer. But now, he thinks about taking control, not because he craves power, but because he wants to burn everything down, to prove that nothing matters anymore. In his grief-stricken mind, it feels like a tribute to Monica, a way of cutting ties with everything she once wanted for him. If he can't be the man she hoped for, then he will fully embrace the darkness she always feared. From there, Jason's behavior grows increasingly erratic. He begins shutting people out completely, including Sam, who grows terrified of the coldness in his eyes. Carly confronts him, begging him to come back to himself, but Jason lashes out, telling her she doesn't understand. His words cut deeply, because for once, Carly realizes she truly doesn't. She has always been able to predict Jason, to know his next move, but now she feels like she's staring at a stranger. Sunny, desperate to rein him in, offers Jason time away from the business, hoping distance will help him heal. But Jason refuses. Instead, he shocks everyone by declaring that he wants to run things his way. It isn't a request, it's a demand. For Sunny, this is a betrayal unlike any other, and it sets the stage for a confrontation that no one in Port Charles could have imagined. Jason is no longer the calm, loyal man who put friendship above power. He has become a storm waiting to unleash itself, and Monica's death is the spark that lit the fire.